All right, it's Thursday. It's almost the end of the week here on the Morning Pitt, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. I always, I feel like once we get to this Thursday edition, we're really kind of coming through to the end of the week, and it's something I think everybody looks forward to. Looks like it's going to be a beautiful weekend. Hopefully the weather holds off on Saturday, but you didn't come here for the weather report. You came here for the latest Pitt sports talk, and that's what we've got here on the Morning Pit on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. You know the deal. You know what we always say. Like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Make sure you're subscribed, then you won't miss any of our exclusive Pitt video content that we have at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. These daily Morning Pitt videos, the live Panther-Lair show, like we did, the one we did last night at 8:30, right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Post-practice videos, practice highlights, interviews, all these different things, and I'm sure we'll have plenty through the summer in addition to these daily Morning Pitt videos, so you don't want to miss any of it. I think it's good content for Pitt fans and something Pitt fans should enjoy. So make sure you're subscribed. Click that subscribe button, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. And of course, once we're done talking here, go check out the website, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com, the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet. Football, basketball, and recruiting. All right here at Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. And message boards there where you can talk with other Pitt fans. You know what I always say. You can talk with hundreds and thousands of other Pitt fans because that's what you like to do. Sometimes you don't like to do it, but either way, you're a Pitt fan, and it's fun to talk to other Pitt fans about Pitt sports, and the best place to do that is Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. And while we've had a lot of things that have sort of distracted us this week, a big part of the focus, of course, remains on the spring game. Pitt held the Blue Gold game last Saturday. I think, what was the final score? The defense ended up winning by a point or something like that, so they're holding on to the blue jerseys, at least to enter training camp, you would presume. But the scoring was far less interesting than the overall, than the individual performances. And I think when you watch a spring game, you're looking for individual performances. You're not looking at scheme or, boy, the defense is doing this or the offense is doing that. You're looking for who's standing out individually. And we talked on Monday, I guess it was. We broke down the offense. We talked about Phil Dracovic. I talked about Bub Means and what we saw to those guys. And we went through sort of position by position, or at least position group by position group, and talked about everything going on with the offense. And we're going to do the same thing with the defense today. Just kind of break down this defense, what we saw on Saturday in addition to what we heard and learned and observed over the course of spring camp. And I'll start off by saying, I have the stat sheet in front of me. Pitt's official state media released stats. Nick Lappy was the leading tackler with 9 total tackles. Javon McIntyre was just as impressive, if not more so, with 6 total tackles, but all solo tackles. Lappy had 4 solo tackles and 5 tackle assists, which is often the case with linebackers in this defense. I think you often see that. McIntyre, though, put up probably one of the better overall stat lines of the day. 6 tackles, all solo, including 2 tackles for loss. He had a strong day and follows a strong spring and follows a strong end to last season. Even if the Pitt coaches were often quick to point out that his details were not always where they needed to be, he still, I think, had a pretty good finish to the season last year, and by all accounts had a pretty good spring camp this year. And there are interesting things about Javon McIntyre. I'll get to that in a second, because there were, we talk about sort of individual performances. I thought there were interesting things about the way Javon McIntyre was used in the Blue Gold game. That maybe they're giving something away, maybe they're not, but they used him in a way that was a little bit interesting, a little bit surprising. We'll talk about that in a second. But you go down through the stat sheets, all the different tackles and stuff, different guys who had sacks. Walk-on linebacker Drew Foster had a sack. Sam Okunlola had a sack. Nate Temple had a sack. Bam Brima and DeAndre Jules each had split a sack, I guess. Those were the officially recorded sacks. Those defensive players were generally wise to keep their hands off the quarterback, although I think on Okunlola's sack, he sort of hugged Phil Dracovic. I think it was Dracovic that he sacked. It was. It was on the first drive of the game. Okunlola beat Ryan Jacoby and Branson Taylor, kind of got right in between them and got back there and just sort of gave a little hug to Phil Dracovic. He didn't sack him. He didn't tackle him. There was nothing aggressive in the way he made contact with him, but he just gave a little hug. The officials and Pat Narduzzi wisely blew the whistle on that one, but it was an impressive play from Okunlola, a redshirt freshman who's gotten a lot of positive pub over the course of spring camp. And then tackles for loss, just kind of running down that list real quick to get into what I really want to talk about here. McIntyre, like I said, Javon McIntyre, the safety, had 2. Drew Foster had 1. That was his sack. Noah Bigelow, the cornerback, had 1. Sean Fitzsimmons had 1. Jimmy Scott, the redshirt freshman defensive end, had 1, as did Sam Okunlola, that sack he had. Brendan George was credited with a tackle for loss. Nate Temple was credited with a tackle for loss. That was the sack that he recorded. A.J. Woods was credited with a tackle for loss. And then 4 players were credited with splitting tackles for losses. Nick Lappy, who I mentioned. Nikai Johnson, Bam Brima. I heard Charlie Partridge say Bam Brima, so I don't know if we're going to have to adjust our general pronunciation of that to Brima, but Partridge said Brima, so I might have to go with him. And then DeAndre Jules, who split the sack with Brima, and ended up with, you get credit for the tackle for loss for that as well. Now, as I went down that list, I don't know if you were paying, how close attention you were paying. Probably not very close. I can put it up, I could hold it up to the camera for you, and you could see, the list of the tackles for losses. It's not going to make any difference to you, but what sticks out to me, what's interesting there, is DeAndre Jules had 0.5 tackles for loss, shared tackle for loss. But there was only one defensive tackle on the team who recorded a solo tackle for loss in the spring game on Saturday. 1. And it was Sean Fitzsimmons. Redshirt freshman from Central Valley, defensive tackle, and a guy that I've been high on since he came out of Central Valley. I mean, he had like 6,000 sacks and tackles for loss at Central Valley. He was unstoppable as a defensive line player at Central Valley. He was almost reminiscent of like John Malecki back at Franklin Regional in 2005 when he led them to a state championship just by being this dominant interior lineman, and Malecki did it on both sides of the ball. Fitzsimmons, a dominant defensive tackle, who came in with a reputation of being very, very disruptive, being a playmaking defensive tackle. Because even the guys they have, that we've talked about so many times, Devin Danielson and David Green and Tyler Bentley, these returning not even redshirt, super senior defensive tackles, they're not necessarily productive. They're not necessarily playmaking defensive tackles. And I think if you look at those guys in high school, even then they weren't putting up big numbers, not like Sean Fitzsimmons did. And by all accounts, Fitzsimmons has more or less carried that over to Pitt. He's carried, the skills that enabled him to have success at Central Valley, he has carried on to Pitt, and he's putting him to work on the practice field so far. He got a handful of games last year, not a ton, but he's going to be part of the rotation at defensive tackle this year, potentially a top 4 defensive tackle. I mean, you've got those guys I mentioned, Danielson, Green, Bentley, and then DeAndre Jules, but Sean Fitzsimmons, I think, has a chance to be the most productive, most impactful, most playmaking defensive tackle out of any of those guys. And I think he showed it in the spring game. Now, we don't want to overread into the spring game. There have been plenty of spring game heroes and spring game champions who don't go on to do anything during the season. Our dear friend Craig Bocor was always a great spring camp player. Buddy Jackson used to get rave reviews every spring camp. He was dominant out there. Nobody could throw on him. He covered, all this stuff. And then very little impact during the regular season. And so we don't want to put too much on the spring game and what we heard out of spring camp and all of that. But to me, I don't think there was a more disruptive defensive player in the spring game than Sean Fitzsimmons. And that's no disrespect to Javon McIntyre. Like he said, he had 6 solo tackles and 2 tackles for loss. Or who was the other one? Nick Lappy had, I thought somebody might have had 3 tackles. No, Javon McIntyre had the most tackles for loss. He had 2. That's not to take anything away from him. But Fitzsimmons, on a regular basis, was giving the offensive line fits. And there was a handful of plays. The first one that he really made a big play and got noticed, it was the 4th drive of the game. He was working on the first team defense against the second team offense, and he broke through and broke up a pass. Got a hand up and got a pass breakup against Nate Yarnell. And Yarnell is quite a bit taller than Fitzsimmons, so it's a pretty good play to break up that pass in addition to breaking through the offensive line. Granted, the second team offensive line, but still. Then the first drive of the second half. Again, Fitzsimmons working on the first team defense against the second team offensive line. He gets through for a tackle for loss on 2nd and 9 that forces a 3rd and 12, I think it was. It ultimately became a 3rd and 17 due to a false start and then went back to a 3rd and 12 due to an offside penalty. But a really disruptive play from Fitzsimmons. And then on the next drive, and I wrote this down because he came back out with the second team defense to work against the first team offensive line. I didn't notice if he did that much in the first half, but the first team offense's first drive of the second half. Now, this is Nate Yarnell at quarterback, but it's the first team offensive line. Branson Taylor at left tackle and Ryan Jacoby at left guard and Jake Cradle at center and Blake Zabovic at right guard and Matt Gonsalves at right tackle. And there were a couple plays that stood out here. And this is, one drive after Fitzsimmons breaks up or gets a tackle for loss. And this is after he has a pass breakup in the first half. He's going up against the the right side of the offensive line, Gonsalves and Zabovic. And on one snap, and you can go back and watch this, it was early in the drive. I mean, Blake Zabovic basically had to use a chokehold on Sean Fitzsimmons and drive him into the ground just to slow him down. It would seem to me that's a holding. If you have your arm wrapped around a guy's neck and you're basically putting him into a chokehold to keep him from getting to your quarterback, it seems like that would be probably a holding penalty, but what do I know? And then, not too long after that, he's working against Gonsalves, and the best thing, Matt Gonsalves, a redshirt senior, a fifth-year senior right tackle, a good player. He's a good offensive tackle, And the best thing Gonsalves could do was just kind of get hands on his back and then just fall on top of him. The only way Gonsalves could stop him from getting to the quarterback was literally to fall on top of him. So you got, two fifth-year, sixth-year offensive linemen needing to resort to chokeholds and body slams to try to slow down this redshirt freshman who's already got a pass breakup and a tackle for loss. Sean Fitzsimmons is one of the guys that I'm pretty excited about with this defense. And again, that's a position, defensive tackle, where they've got some veterans, but they don't necessarily have veterans who are productive. The good players, solid players, they do their jobs. They help open things up for the defensive ends and the linebackers. But if you want a guy who's going to produce, if you want a guy who's going to make plays in the backfield and have that kind of impact, Fitzsimmons is your guy. I really believe that. And I think it's going to be hard for them to keep him off the field. You want to go with experience. You don't want to give up things in terms of knowledge and knowing the defense and being able to recognize the offense. But put Fitzsimmons out there next to David Green or Devin Danielson or whoever. One of those experienced guys so they can make sure that he's lined up where he needs to be lined up. And then just let him go. Because I think he's going to make a lot of plays. I think he's a really exciting player to watch. And it's really exciting to think about his potential as a playmaking defensive tackle. He really was. There were a handful of guys who made some big plays. P.J. O'Brien had the pick six, and like I say, McIntyre had a really good day. He put up good stats, and a couple of other guys had sacks, and all this stuff. But for my money, Fitzsimmons might have been as impressive as anybody in that blue gold game last Saturday. All right, moving on to some other things. Safety. Really interesting. I think I put this, I think I talked about this on Friday on the Morning Pitt when I talked about things to watch for. There's Steph Hall. He popped up on the screen conveniently. I think I talked about it on the Morning Pitt. I wrote about it, I think, we put up an article Friday or Saturday morning of things to watch for in the blue gold game. And one of the things I talked about, one of the things I wrote about was the safety pairings and how they would line up Stephon Hall and Javon McIntyre and Phillip O'Brien and Donovan McMillan. And the way I kind of saw it, McMillan was pretty locked into being a boundary safety. Remember, they played boundary field, so short side of the field, wide side of the field. It's effectively strong safety field, strong safety, free safety, but they go boundary field. The boundary safety being the guy who works down in the box, has more responsibilities against the run, and often can pile up a lot of tackles. Jordan Whitehead was the Pitt's leading tackler for a couple of years, largely on the strength of playing that boundary safety position. And so Donovan McMillan seemed slated for that boundary safety position, was pretty much only working at that spot this spring. They tried to cross-train the other guys, but McMillan was pretty locked into that one spot, largely because he just got here and he's trying to learn the defense. And so rather than putting two positions on his plate, they stuck to one and just let him work there. But I said it was going to be interesting to see what they do with the other guys, because Steph Hall has talked about being that field safety, which is that center field guy. It's Eric Hallett last year, DeMar Hamlin before him. Steph Hall has worked there, but also has gotten time in the past at boundary safety. Javon McIntyre, when he got playing time last year, was in place of Brandon Hill at the boundary safety spot, but he has said this spring that he's been cross-training with the field safety position. And Philip O'Brien, I think, is more or less locked into the field safety spot. He was Eric Hallett's number one backup last season, and I think that's kind of his primary role. But I was curious to see how they would match them up, and it definitely came out really interesting because, as far as I could tell, Stephon Hall was getting a whole lot of time at boundary safety. Javon McIntyre was getting a whole lot of time at field safety, which is kind of flip of what I expected and where I thought those guys would go. And it does speak to the cross-training that they're able to do different positions, and I think the coaches want them to be comfortable in all the positions. You don't necessarily want to be locked into a spot where, I have these two guys and they can only do this, and I have these two guys and they can only do this, because then you want to be able to say, get my next safety out there, regardless of what position goes down. And that's not always going to be the case at linebacker, maybe wide receiver. I think you probably get locked into some positions. Offensive line, you've got some guys who can probably move around. Corners, I think, can flip. They can understand the responsibilities, plus they're all older guys. But I think the coaches want to be at a spot where McIntyre can play both and do both well. That Stephon Hall can play both and do both well. Probably that Philip O'Brien can play both and do both well, and maybe eventually Donovan McMillan, although I wouldn't be surprised if they stand pat with him at boundary safety. So when they opened the game, second team defense on the field, it was Philip O'Brien and Stephon Hall, with O'Brien at the field safety and Hall at the boundary safety. And then when they came out with the first team defense on the second possession, going against the second team offense, it was McIntyre and McMillan. McMillan playing the boundary safety, which is what we expected, but McIntyre kind of debuting at the field safety spot. I thought that was interesting. And it got even more interesting, or continued to get interesting, I guess, when they went to their Delta defensive package. Now, remember, the Delta they go to on third, it's their third and long defensive sub package. Most third downs, I think even third and 4 and beyond, they're going to go to that package. Maybe even like a 3rd and 3 if they're playing a team like North Carolina or somebody like that. If it's a run-heavy team, it's Syracuse, they might stick to their base defense on 3rd and 4, but certainly 3rd and 5 or longer in almost all situations. Maybe obvious four down territory, they wouldn't do it, but 3rd and 5 or longer, I think, they're going to go to that Delta defensive sub package, and that thing is set up with 3 defensive linemen, 3 linebackers, and then 5 defensive backs. It's kind of structured like a 3-3-5, although there's been some variability in what player and what position they use for that extra defensive back. They actually call it their star position in the Delta defense, and we've seen a bunch of different guys do it. We've seen safeties. I think for the first few years it was largely a safety. 2021 they used John Patrician in that role as he's a linebacker, but he was formerly a safety. Rashad Battle seemed like he was lined up for that role last season. McIntyre played in that role. So you have a mix of defensive backs and occasionally a linebacker playing in that extra defensive position. On Saturday, at least what they did and what they were willing to put on TV, they used corners. They used extra corners in the Delta defense from what I could see. I think the first one I saw, I guess the second team Delta defense, they had their cornerbacks were, let me back up. So I think for the most part on their second team defense, they had Noah Bigelow and Rylan Gandy as the cornerbacks. And then when they went to the Delta, they moved Gandy into sort of the middle of the defense, almost playing like a nickelback. I mean, that's probably the easiest way to think of it, is as a nickel. And then they brought in Tamarian Crumpley to be the other corner on the other side of the field. In the first team defense, sort of the same thing, kind of. They had Marquez Williams and MJ Devonshire. Those are your top 2 corners. And then they brought in AJ Woods to be that third corner, that extra DB in the package, the nickel. effectively. And so that was interesting to see them using a corner in that role. As somebody on the message boards often points out, Rashad Battle, when he gets healthy, is a likely candidate for that job. I think Donovan McMillan could play there as well. He might be. I mean, he's almost sort of in that patrician mode of like a bigger guy, a bigger safety who can still run well. So he might be an option there. But at least on Saturday for the Blue Gold game, again, knowing full well that it was going to be on, if not on TV, it was going to be available for broadcast. And rebroadcast that other teams could watch it. They decided to use a corner in those situations. At the safety spots, they used McIntyre and Hall together. So again, with Hall working at the boundary safety and McIntyre at the field safety. So I thought that was pretty interesting, and it's going to be interesting to watch how they line up this season. I came into spring camp assuming the top safeties would be PJ O'Brien and Javon McIntyre, with O'Brien at field safety and McIntyre at boundary safety. Now, I think it's a wider, more open competition, particularly with Hall pushing O'Brien for playing time. And if Hall can play either spot and McIntyre can play either spot, you really open up a lot of options and a lot of possibilities for how you can mix and match those guys as you work to get your top two on the field. Linebacker spot, I think Saturday, the Blue Gold game just kind of reconfirmed what we thought throughout spring camp, which reconfirmed what we thought heading into spring camp. Great top line with Solomon DeShields and Bengali Kamara at outside linebacker and Shane Simon at middle linebacker, and then Brandon George as the top backup. Great top line there. Great top four, I think. And George even played some outside linebacker in the spring game on Saturday as well. Just major depth questions. If you look at the second team linebackers on Saturday, it was Brandon George in the middle. Okay. Braylon Lovelace at the backup backup star linebacker, I think he was, which he's a true freshman. I think Lovelace can be good, but he's a true freshman who just got to campus 3 months ago. And then Nick Lappy, the walk-on at the backup money linebacker. So that's kind of the position you're in right now in spring camp. And you're not really sitting there with a lot of guys out due to injury. I think Kyle Lewis, who's been slowed a bit over his career so far, could eventually be in that mix. And you got some freshmen coming in, particularly Jordan Bass, who might be able to contribute. But it's a dicey situation with the depth at linebacker. And that's what we thought prior to spring camp. And that's what we thought throughout spring camp and coming out of the Blue Gold game. It's the thought again. It's the same thought of, boy, that depth is questionable. And you either are going to suck it up and go with some freshmen on your two deep, or you're going to go out and find a transfer. I wouldn't be surprised if they look for someone. The tough thing is going to be, you're going to need like a Tyler Wiltz again, because they've got the top three starting spots, I think, more or less locked up. And even if they don't, if there's a competition, it's a competition among four returning guys. You're going to need somebody who, Wiltz was willing to come in and be a backup, at least initially, because he wanted an opportunity at the Power 5 level. You're going to have to find someone like that. And that, they did a great job finding him last year. They're going to have their work cut. They're going to have their work cut out for them again this year to try and find another guy like that. But overall, I can't say there are too many changed perceptions that we had out of the spring game, or out of spring camp on the whole, really. I think I came out of spring camp pretty high on Sean Fitzsimmons, but I was anticipating that heading in. Bengali Kamara, I think, is going to be really good. Javon McIntyre, I think, needs to clean it up, and he's got a chance to be really good. But the coaches kept emphasizing how much he needs to pay more attention to details, and I thought that was pretty striking. So he's going to have to, figure that out. But on the whole, I think, their defense. I don't know that there were any major revelations from spring camp or the Blue Gold game. But you let me know. You think there were? Tell us in the comments, or tell us on the message boards, or tell us on Twitter. Tell, one way or another. Tell me what major impressions and takeaways you had from Pitt's defense in the Blue Gold game. Tomorrow we've got our mailbag edition of the Morning Pitt. Remember, you can find that on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com. On the Between Fifth and Forbes message board, there's a thread there, mailbag questions. You can put your question in, and we'll answer as many as we can on tomorrow's Morning Pitt. So that's always fun. I look forward to that. You never know what we're going to get in terms of questions, but we'll take as many as we can. And if we have more left over, we'll do them next week. So always look forward to that. And I thank everybody I appreciate everybody who participates, because it's always fun to do. All right, that does it for us here on a Thursday. I hope you've had a great week so far, and I hope your Thursday goes well. Make sure you like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com, and then we'll catch you over on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com. Thanks again for checking it out today. Hope you have a great Thursday. We'll talk to you tomorrow morning on the Morning Pitt right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.